Welcome back to the Alice Stewart Show on 96.5 The Voice.
Say you want a revolution.
Welcome back to the show. 7:06 here on Friday, December 20th. Many gearing up for the big Christmas week next week. And without a doubt, Washington has been busy on many issues, namely the budget, Obamacare, but the Iran nuclear deal has taken front and center stage without a doubt. And there's recently Secretary of State Kerry went and worked on a deal with Iran. It was met with mixed emotions. The latest coming down yesterday, 26 senators, half of them Democrats, defied President Obama by introducing a bill that would impose new sanctions on Iran, despite urgent pleas from the White House to shelve this legislation. Well, members of our House have already taken a step on that, and it has been met with mixed reviews. Our Congressman Tom Cotton joins us this morning. Congressman, great to have you here.
Hey, Alice, great to be on with you as always. I heard the music coming in from the break of Revolution, which is actually pretty appropriate. You know, Iran still claims to have the revolutionary spirit of 1979 when the Ayatollahs took over, and we're still living with that mistake today. And they still are claiming that America is the great Satan, and that's one reason why they've had a headlong pursuit for nuclear weapons, because they want to ultimately eject America from the Middle East and attack us around the world.
And one of the concerns, in my view, when we see what Secretary Kerry came back with and what we're doing with Iran, is we were making progress with the sanctions we had, and then we ease the sanctions, and then we take their word for it that they're going to put the pause button on enriching uranium, and we can't take their word for it. But what we have lately with Iran, it's a defeat, and Iran is winning here.
Yeah, Alice, the sanctions that had taken years to put in place, not just with the United States, but with Europe and some of our other allies around the world, were beginning to have a real effect. They were taking billions of dollars out of Iran's oil and gas sector, as well as their financial services sector, and they were freezing Iran's money around the world. That's the only thing that made Iran willing to talk at all about its nuclear weapons program, which is why it's so astonishing that at a moment of maximum leverage for the United States and our allies, we let Iran up off the mat. We cut a deal last month that gave them sanctions relief and billions of dollars directly into their accounts. In the meantime, Iran gives us nothing but easily reversible promises. They get to keep their uranium. They get to keep their centrifuges. They get to keep using those centrifuges to enrich uranium. They get to keep their plutonium-producing reactor. They get to keep their weaponization program. They even get to keep their missile program, which our own Air Force estimates could produce intercontinental missiles capable of hitting us right here in Arkansas or anywhere else around the United States in barely 1 year.
Absolutely, and hitting the pause button is what they allege that they are doing now. What in essence, the agreement that has been reached buys them time and buys. We ease up sanctions. We give them the economic trade ability that they want when the sanctions that we had in place were working, and this buys them time. And when this is all said and done, they will just kick back on the switch and continue to enrich uranium like they have before. And we're not, the whole idea behind any of our foreign policy is peace through strength. And we had a symbol of strength with the sanctions in place, and we took it off the table.
Yes, and if you want to know what a decision to stop a nuclear weapons program and turn over all material looks like, we had a great leader that just passed away recently that did so, Nelson Mandela. South Africa turned over all of its nuclear weapons materials and programs, and it opened up everything to international inspectors. Iran could easily do that, but it's not doing that. It is simply putting, like you said, putting a very, very brief pause on, and what's worse is that we're now a month on from this so-called agreement, and it hasn't actually gone into effect. Iran's had to stop none of its activities. They're now haggling over the details of how to implement this agreement, which means Iran's had a full month of no repercussions whatsoever. And that could continue into the future. This is one reason why I sponsored sanctions legislation in the House earlier this year that passed with 400 votes. And while I'm pleased to see that the Senate has proposed new bipartisan sanctions that would go into effect if this interim agreement is violated by Iran, which I think is quite possible, or if we don't reach a complete denuclearization program point in Iran in the next year.
And in addition to the concerns we have with basically putting the pause on enriching uranium, which in my view, that just buys them time, and they will continue full speed ahead when this comes to an end. But the damage, just as concerning in my view, the damage this has done, and that our greatest allies in the region in Israel aren't supportive of this, and we're harming a very valuable relationship with our friends in Israel.
Prime Minister Netanyahu
Right.
and his senior defense ministers are deeply troubled by this decision of Barack Obama to give sanctions relief to Iran. Look, they view this as an existential threat, as they should. They're a small country. We're a big country. They're close to Iran. We're far from Iran. And as much as Iran views the United States as the great Satan, they equally view Israel as a little Satan. And their leadership over the past several years have used the most vicious, vile, anti-Semitic kind of language, threatening to wipe Israel off the map. So, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu and senior Israeli leaders, and for that matter, every Israeli citizen, based on my experience there in August, views Iran as an existential and immediate threat to their country and to the Jewish people.
And so what do you see as the best way to move forward on this issue? Clearly, the agreement that Kerry worked out is, in my view, not the best way for our country to respond to this. But what would be your best case scenario and how to follow through?
I believe we do need to move forward with sanctions legislation.
Right.
Again, the legislation introduced yesterday would be a triggered kind of legislation, so it would only go into effect if Iran violated this agreement, or if they didn't completely surrender their nuclear weapons program within the next year. So not only would the sanctions return, but they would also be tightened. It would essentially put a total embargo on Iranian oil within 2 years. Currently, they're still able to export some. It would also expand sanctions to sectors of their economy that are currently not significantly hit by those sanctions, like mining and engineering and real estate and so forth.
Right.
So I think we need to move forward with sanctions legislation in both the Senate and the House. The President, to my astonishment yesterday, issued a veto threat of this legislation. Well, in the House, we passed our legislation with 400 votes, so the President can issue veto threats all he wants, but we will have the votes to override any potential veto, and I hope that would be the case in the Senate as well.
And that's the key, as spokesman Jay Carney said yesterday, quote, "We don't think it will be enacted. We certainly don't think it should be enacted." So whether they fight it tooth and nail, like you said, if it needs to have the support of both the House and the Senate and move forward with sanctions in order to get back on the right side of dealing with Iran.
Absolutely. And Alice, it's very important to remember, Jay Carney and the President, John Kerry, are saying that we can't enact new sanctions legislation because the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, is a moderate and he's trying to work with hardline factions in Iran. There are not factions when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, controls every program. This is like the old left during the Soviet Union days, was always looking for the doves or for the peacemakers in the Kremlin. And they weren't. They were all Soviet communists who were portraying certain people as moderates to play to the woolly-headed sympathies of the United States left, and the idea that there were moderates in that country. And that's the same thing that's happening in Iran right now.
Right. We need to show a heck of a lot more strength in dealing with them. I want to switch gears real quick. We've got just a little time left. I want to ask you about something that's capturing the headlines and the news stories across the country, and it is the dealing with Duck Dynasty. A&E's program, Duck Dynasty, is under a lot of fire. The patriarch of this show, Phil Robertson, became under fire. He did an interview with GQ magazine, as you're aware, over some controversial remarks he made about gay people and the homosexual community. And he made the statements based on, this is his religious belief, his belief in God, and his Bible teachings are the foundation for his comments about homosexuals, and it has led to a huge backfire. They've suspended him from the show. His family stands behind him. A lot of on the internet, folks have come out against him, but overwhelmingly, people are standing by him and say they'll boycott the show until he goes back on. What are your thoughts on how this has really erupted into such a controversial issue?
Alice, I love Duck Dynasty like so many Arkansans and Americans. In fact, during this Christmas season, I've been listening to their holiday CD, things like Duck the Holes and Have a Very Merry Christmas. But the reason so many people love that show is because it stands for so much of what America stands for on their day-to-day life. You know, they end every show with a family meal and a prayer. That's a side of America that the Hollywood and D.C. liberals oftentimes ignore or, in fact, disrespect. You don't have to agree with everything you see on TV to say that people should not be fired or suspended from their job for expressing their own personal religious faith or their own views. There's lots of stuff with which I disagree that I see on TV or read in magazines, and I don't go around calling for people's heads at their jobs.
And his comments, as he said, were his views, and this was in an interview. It wasn't on the show. It was an off-camera interview with GQ, and it was a big spread. And in my view, the press person should have never agreed to that interview to begin with. But A&E at first came out and acknowledged his personal views in no way reflect those of A&E, yet still they are placing him on hiatus from filming. And in my view, this is the Hollywood and the homosexual community coming to outrage once again against, in my view, someone who is expressing their Christian views. And this is more of a war on Christianity that we see time and time again.
It is a good point, Alice, that these views were not expressed on the show. They were done outside the workplace, you might say, and therefore, they are not directly related to his work on the show, and he's being punished at his workplace for expressing his Christian faith.
And just what would be your suggestion? Put him back on the show and let things move forward?
I know the family has issued a statement that they would find it very hard for the show to move forward without Bill Robertson on the show, since he's the patriarch of the entire family and the business. So we'll see what A&E intends to do. I do think it's somewhat ironic that A&E made a big stink about suspending him from the show, yet they're still running the show. They're running Christmas specials. They're running marathons of the show, so they certainly don't mind profiting off of what has become one of America's most beloved shows, even while they're catering to the Hollywood left and D.C. liberals.
Yeah, they talking out of both sides of their mouth, for sure. Congressman Tom Cotton, thank you so much for your thoughts and comments on Iran, as well as weighing in on the Duck Dynasty controversy. Congressman, thank you, and have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners.
Thank you. We'll take a break. We'll be back after this.
Brought to you courtesy of the red, white, and blue.
The Alice Stewart Show on 96.5 The Voice.